In this lesson, we'll refactor the code within our useEffect function to utilize the async await syntax instead of the then syntax for a promise. I want to show you this syntax because the way it needs to be written might not be what you expect. So first up, let's begin by actually writing the code. So right here, I'm going to get rid of this then right here. We no longer need it, and we no longer need the former closing brackets for that method. So I'm just going to remove this code right here. And of course, this can simply be assigned to response. And that is going to be the evaluation of calling await axios.get, because the get method is what's going to return a promise. So right here, we can perform the exact same logic of taking the data property from that Axios response object and then setting the employee's setter function to be the new array of employee objects. All right. So all of this code is correct, except of course that if we're using the await keyword, we need to have an async function, and we need to designate that a function is async by giving it the async keyword. Now, a very common mistake that people make in React is they think that they can provide the async keyword right here. As it turns out, this is actually invalid. It will not work. And you can see if I hover my mouse over it here, it says effect callbacks are synchronous to prevent race conditions, right? So in other words, we cannot use the async keyword in front of our function that we pass to useEffect. It must be a synchronous function. So how do we get around this issue? Well, we can't make this primary function asynchronous, but we can define another function within the body of this synchronous function that can be async. Okay, so here's what the syntax is going to look like. I'm going to get rid of this async keyword, and then in here, I'm going to define an arrow function directly in line. So I'm going to call it fetch employees, but the name is entirely up to us. And here, I'm going to define an asynchronous arrow function body, like so. And then I'm going to drag this code into here, like so. So right now, we have a synchronous function that we are passing to useEffect that within its body is declaring an asynchronous function called fetch employees. But we're not done yet because there's nothing actually that's running our fetch employees code. Remember, JavaScript and React will run this function, but when this function runs, it's going to declare its own async function that hasn't yet run. So what we need to do within the body of our original function is actually invoke that asynchronous fetch employees function, and this will accomplish what we want. So this is how we refactor. So the key takeaway here, if you are using async await syntax within an effect, you cannot use the async keyword in front of the main function that you pass in to useEffect. That function must always be synchronous, so it cannot return a promise, okay? However, what you can do within the body of that synchronous function is declare an asynchronous function like so, and then immediately afterwards, you invoke that asynchronous function, and the logic will work the exact same way. And that allows us to use the await syntax because the async keyword is technically not going on this function, it's going on the internal nested function that we are invoking. And this will work just fine. So once again, I can save this, and on the right-hand side, when I type characters, you can see everything is still working, which means our Axios response is successfully being received, which means we're making it correctly, which means this promise-based syntax and the awaiting of it, that syntax is working just fine. As a reminder, the async await syntax is not a new option. It's just syntactic sugar over the original then method. So it's the same thing under the hood. It's just a syntax that is a little bit more elegant and clearer to write and avoids us having to pass an additional callback function to the then method. So it tends to read a little bit more easier. I think it's easier for a lot of newer developers to understand because it just reads sequentially without any additional nesting or callback functions or anything like that. But if you are going to use the syntax, you do need a separate function declaration within the body of your useEffect function, and it's that function that will be asynchronous. All right, that's all there is to cover in this lesson, so I will see you in the next one.